So welcome to PackView's Q3 2021 CPC report for Amazon. Just going to introduce myself quickly. I'm Jack Lindberg. I'm one of the customer success managers here at PackView. And I'm joined by my fabulous colleague, Michael Volks, who's also one of the customer success managers here.
Hi, everyone.
Just a reminder before we get moving. This webinar is going to be recorded and will be sent out later today, along with the deck, as well as our full CPC report, which is already online. As we go along, we're going to be taking questions at the end. So if you have questions as we go, or sort of when we reach that Q&A point, feel free to put them in the Q&A section as we go. Awesome. Okay. So we have a quick agenda today. We're just going to talk briefly through what's new with PackView, what are the big things on the horizon for us, what are some of those key takeaways going off in the e-com world at large, some more down and dirty numbers regarding our Q3 results and insights, and then we're going to open the floor for QA. All right. So let's get started with some of those industry trends and news. So the biggest thing facing all of our clients at PackView are some of these, global supply chain issues that looks like they're going to remain for a while longer. So we're going to expect, shipping delays, stocking delays across very many verticals within our industry. Definitely, it's going to be persistent as we reach, Q4. So many retailers and brands that we've been working with, we've been advising them, maybe you want to consider starting your promotions a little bit early, dragging some of that demand a little bit earlier in Q4. So if that's not on your radar, maybe start thinking about that. But PackView definitely has some solutions in the works to help brands navigate some of these supply chain issues going forward. So that brings me to one of our newer products that we just announced, PackView for Commerce. So PackView for Commerce is meant to be our new product focusing on the supply chain logistics and operational side of the e-commerce business. Working with that sort of inventory data, we're going to be able to, one, help you optimize those pieces of the business, but also connect it to our existing retail media platform and bridge those gaps and make some, really insightful and innovative optimizations using both halves of those data sets together. Additionally, PackView has also announced our Amazon Marketing Cloud integration. So for those of you that aren't super familiar, Amazon Marketing Cloud is an open database from Amazon that you have to query using SQL. And what that data set allows you to do is track an individual consumer's journey through all of your Amazon marketing efforts. So starting with DSP or OTT, all the way down to purchase via sponsored products. And that allows for really interesting data, which can drive some, much more holistic and heuristically important and valuable decisions. So definitely, if you're interested in either of these products, we can chat about that a little bit more. But the real nuts and bolts today will be about Amazon. So Amazon did release some new things in Q3, as they always do. Some of the more interesting ones, sponsored ads in stores launched in Sweden, as well as some DSP in the Nordic countries. And there have been a bunch of new changes to sponsored display, with a creative editing API now available, as well as audience campaigns that are now available on Twitch and in Brazil and Mexico. So we'll see some really interesting developments there for those of our advertisers or partners that are working in those geos, as well as some of these new to brand metrics available for product targeting and audiences, really useful in conjunction with Amazon Marketing Cloud, which allows you to have new to brand metrics for sponsored products, which is otherwise hard to get.
Okay, thanks, Jack. So with those intro notes, let's now dive into some of the data that we're starting to see from Q3. So some key takeaways that we've observed with sponsored ads and Amazon. Number one, sponsored products ad spend has increased 41.8% year over year. So a large amount of growth compared to what we were seeing last year at the same time with sponsored products. However, quarter over quarter, we didn't see any major spikes or declines in daily spend, although sponsored products has increased slightly more in spend, while sponsored brands did see a minor decline. Additionally, some quick trends about keyword searches. After leaving the top 10 searches for the first time in over a year in Q2, face masks quickly rose to the top of the most searched terms on Amazon, in line with the Delta variant surging in the United States in Q3. However, interestingly, cleaning supplies and some of the other, pandemic-associated products that saw huge spikes last year did not see the same level of spike and were not in the top 20 most searched terms. I think that's sort of in line with consumers having a better understanding of what is going to prevent the spread of coronavirus and taking the appropriate precautions. Some additional, another fun slide showing some of those top search terms. So as we mentioned, face masks were number 1 in Q3. Poppets were also really high. They remained number 2 in search terms over the course of the quarter. I did not know what a poppet was until I looked into it, but they are right up there. So if you are encountering these a lot in your daily life, you're not going crazy. Also, some seasonal terms are back. We're seeing a lot of searches for holiday items surrounding fall time and also Halloween costumes and decorations. Some more additional trends. The term disposable face mask, as we mentioned, reached the top of Amazon search queries in August 2021. Face masks, poppets, desks, and earbuds also held the top search spots in Q3, indicating a strong return to the office and then back to school since some of those changes that have occurred like after a long pandemic season where most people were at home. Additionally, Halloween decorations, iPhone 13 Pro Max cases, and homecoming dresses were among top search spots as of early September Q3.
Awesome.
Additionally, we have some top level data about trends between the different ad types. We've seen that budgets spend went slightly up for sponsored products while it went down for sponsored brands. And I think that this makes quite a bit of sense. If budgets are tight from an advertising perspective, I think it's more likely that you're going to conserve the budget for sponsored products, given that sponsored products is that lowest funnel, real conversion driving ad type on Amazon. Not to say that sponsored brands don't also drive conversions, but they're seen a little bit more as a branded ad type. And so if budgets are tight from an overall, media allocation perspective, keeping that sponsored product budget flat while maybe pulling back a little bit on sponsored brand makes a lot of sense from a strategic perspective. So moving right along, I'm going to hand it back over. Go ahead, Jack.
So to echo Michael's point, that's definitely the trend we saw with spend, where sponsored products was up year over year, right, quarter over quarter, but sponsored brands was down quarter over quarter while still up pretty sizably year over year. And I think some of that, as Michael mentioned, really is due to inventory concerns. Sponsored products give you a little bit more efficacy in terms of optimizing your ad spend towards the products which you do have inventory, whereas sponsored brands is a little bit more generalized. So definitely, I think, Michael's point really hammers home that, when facing inventory constraints, it seems that our partners are moving towards those ad types that give them more flexibility to adjust to varying inventory constraints over time. Okay. We also saw this definitely shift in terms of click-through rate. Sponsored products really did have a big jump in click-through rate, both quarter over quarter and year over year, while the inverse was true of sponsored brands. Hard to speculate here why sponsored brands sort of saw that decline in click-through rate. I think part of it is due to that increase in sponsored brand placements, having them serve on detail pages. Is going to continue to, change the sort of mix about how sponsored brands works. It's not just that top of the headline, banner anymore, that those additional placements are going to, drive down click-through rate over time as they become in sort of subprime placements. But really interesting to see sponsored product continue to increase click-through rate quarter over quarter and year over year. Okay. So CPCs were actually pretty flat quarter over quarter, which was good to see. We're not seeing that sort of continuous CPC creep that we normally see quarter over quarter, but we did see some of that spike in year over year for sponsored products. What I've been seeing across many categories for sponsored products is due to some of Amazon's private label and the increased visibility of sponsored products that those top organic rankings are becoming more and more frequently below the fold, below the scroll, so to say. So those top sponsored product placements become even more valuable to catch more eyeballs. And definitely we've seen increased efficacy from there in terms of click-through rate, whereas sponsored brands has remained pretty flat year over year and quarter over quarter in terms of CPCs. Okay.
Whoops.
Not your good. Perfect. Okay. So for sponsored products, the conversion rate, we actually saw that reach a year over year really strong boost of 16%, reaching the highest we've seen it at 17.8%. So really quite high. Still up, almost 4% quarter over quarter, whereas sponsored brands conversion rate dipped slightly both quarter over quarter and year over year. And I think some of that comes down to ad inventory, but also, as I mentioned, that increased visibility of sponsored products, the sort of deflation of organic ranking as more and more of those top ranking products are either sponsored products or Amazon private label. Makes it a little bit more difficult to compete through organic means alone in the SERP.
Okay, some other trends that we're observing overall. CPA remained relatively stable across both ad types. Sponsored products saw a 4% decrease in CPA quarter over quarter and about a 2% decrease year over year. Sponsored brands was pretty much flat quarter over quarter with a slight 2% increase year over year. CPA, of course, being sort of a combination of a couple of those metrics that we just discussed. And so if we're seeing conversion rate decline, it would stand to reason that there would be a slight increase in CPA for sponsored brands. So all of this making quite a lot of sense. Additionally, ROAS has continued to decrease slightly from the peak right at the start of the pandemic. I think this is to be expected as advertisers started to reinvest a lot as kind of pandemic situation normalized. We saw extremely high ROAS. It started to creep back down progressively over time. We saw about a 2% decline in ROAS quarter over quarter for sponsored products, 6% decline year over year, and then sponsored brands, 4% decline quarter over quarter and 13% decline year over year. I think if you're thinking back to some of those metrics that we just discussed with Jack, that sponsored product ROAS very much attributed to the continued creep up in CPCs, whereas sponsored brand probably more attributed to that decline that we're seeing from a conversion rate perspective. Looking at some individual categories a little bit more closely, I think the toys and games category really, it's like a microcosm of what we're seeing overall, which is that ROAS has declined after having like a real peak towards the start of the year. You saw that 12.84% ROAS in April, and it's steadily declined since then. However, I think it's going to be interesting to continue to track this category as we head into the holiday season. Would anticipate that conversion rates are going to improve as Christmas shopping and holiday shopping starts. And so we would anticipate that even if CPCs might go up a little bit, conversion rate will improve. So we'll see how that levels out as we head into the holiday season. Interesting photos were the best-selling items in the toys and games category. Within the pet supplies category, we saw continued kind of high CPCs in Q3. This is a category that has seen a 51.7% year-over-year increase in CPCs in September compared to the previous year. I think anecdotally, for some of the pet supplies brands that I've been working with, I've seen like really increased attention towards Amazon and sponsored products in general. And so that kind of a competitive atmosphere is just going to result in higher CPCs within this category. Dog bed, dog food, dog toys, dog treats were all in the top 200 most searched terms on Amazon in September. So this category has really exploded into one of the biggest categories within this space. And it seems as though advertisers are really responding by investing more aggressively and trying to win each other out, which is driving that increase in CPCs. Looking at electronics, CPCs and average daily spend in the electronics category both increased dramatically by 78.5% and 72.5% respectively in September. Cost per click also increased pretty dramatically year over year from 65 cents to $1.16 this year, which is very much in line with that 72.5% increase in spend. I think that's something to definitely keep your eye on because we would only expect investment to increase heading into the holiday season within this category. Something that Jack talked about before, holiday spending is or the holiday season in terms of buyer behavior is only stretching. And so given that these CPCs are creeping up and up, might make sense to make a recommendation to sort of stretch those holiday budgets to avoid having to deal with extremely high CPCs throughout the peak of the holiday season. Okay, couple things to look out for going into Q4. Sales are expected to be really strong this year, but supply chain issues are expected to remain throughout the holiday season. So we have a couple of recommendations for our clients. One, if you're not already, we really recommend looking into creating inventory rules. These are rules that you can set up that will automatically pause your products that have low inventory based on the number of weeks on hand that you have for that individual product. This way you avoid promoting products to the point of them going out of stock. We know that sponsored product ads won't serve against products that aren't available. But I think that you can kind of feel that if you're promoting to the point that they're unavailable, that's probably ad spend that you didn't need to utilize on that product as it would have gone out of stock regardless of that promotion. So definitely talk to your customer success manager if you don't know how to set those up. Additionally, we'd recommend creating bidding rules to lower bids on keywords that are advertising products that have low inventory, to prioritize investing more and investing more aggressively on products that you know you're going to have healthy inventory for. Additionally, you can set up email alerts for items that have low inventory. This way, if you have certain priority items that you know you need to keep a close eye on, you can be immediately informed by PackView if you're seeing any inventory issues start to creep up so that you can take immediate action. Finally, a couple suggestions that we've already mentioned. You could consider pulling your campaigns forward to avoid any CPC spikes. Amazon has already started some holiday shopping deals, so it's not too early to start thinking about that. Amazon's already thinking about that, and we're all living in Amazon's world. The retail media also, it continues to grow. So if you want to win those top spots across retailers, now is a really good time before that peak in the holiday season where things will start to get really expensive to really start testing out what it would take to occupy those top spots and what kind of returns and overall revenue you can see from doing so. If you have any other questions and want to get into some more detail about any of these points that we've made today, definitely download the report. There's going to be even more insight than what we've shared on this call. You might be able to find some information about categories that we haven't discussed. So definitely take some time to look through the report and ask your customer success manager if you have any questions. Finally, if you have any questions and you don't have a sales representative or customer success point of contact to reach out to, you can contact us at www.pacview.com or reach out to sales@pacview.com for any more information. With that, that's the end of our presentation. So I am going to open the Q&A box and we can start to work through some of these questions.
Awesome.
So the first came from an anonymous attendee. It said, how will supply constraints impact level of Amazon's advertising spend, as well as general advertising in Q3 and Q4? How will supply constraints reallocate budgets between the various funnel points? Okay, good question. I can tackle this first one if you'd like, Jack. So
go for it.
I think that what we would not anticipate that overall, generally, supply constraints are going to cause a reduction in advertising spend. I think this is something that we're going to see very much vary from category to category and supplier to supplier. We're seeing that generally over the holiday season, that's when spend creeps up and advertising creeps up, and we would expect that to continue. However, I think you made a really good point about reallocating budgets between various funnel points. I think that for the categories where there are allocation constraints, I think that within the Amazon ecosystem, we're going to see a lot more sponsored product spend versus maybe some of the more upper funnel channels, just because you have so much more, and by upper funnel sponsored brand, just because you have so much more control over the individual ASIN. So you can really pinpoint exactly which ASINs that you're promoting to make sure that you're putting spend behind the ASINs that have the least supply constraint problems.
Yeah, I think the only other piece that I would add to that is thinking about your post Q4 strategy. When you turn the table into Q1, now would be the time to begin setting up really strong remarketing and retargeting campaigns, so that if you miss the people coming through Black Friday, Cyber Monday, or pre-holidays, you can then re-engage them in Q1 and create that, start to create those brand loyalty customers after they've purchased you for the first time for the holidays.
That's a good point. I mean, when you think about like really higher funnel like DSP, you could very much adjust your messaging if you're dealing with inventory constraints to go with more of a branded approach as opposed to driving sales of a particular product that might go offline. And then, like you said, focus on remarketing if there are any inventory constraints going into Q1.
Cool.
Okay.
Next question from Chase Arnold. Any observations of the effectiveness of Amazon sponsored brands changes, specifically being able to add more than 3 items to a sponsored brand campaign? I think that change has been really effective. One of the most frustrating things as an ad manager is when one of your products in a sponsored brand ad goes out of stock and you drop from 3 products to 2 products. So I think having the flexibility to have additional products is really valuable. I think what I would say in terms of sponsored brands is sponsored brands like sponsored products is becoming ubiquitous across all pages of the site, not just in the top of the search result page. So I think that's going to possibly shift the way we conceptualize sponsored brands, right? I think in the original incarnation of sponsored brands was as close as you could get as like an Amazon billboard. You put your brand name and your best products in the top of the search results. But I think as it's crawling and creeping more onto detail pages, we're going to see some of that branding change. trying to shift users and customers from the, when they're closer to that point of purchase and rather than when they're doing that brand exploration process.
Awesome. Next question was, how do you expect CPC and CPA to change for Q4? I wish I wish I could say exactly, but I think that if we're following the general trends for sponsored products, we've seen steady creep up in CPC and CPA, but and then sponsored brand CPCs, I believe, went down slightly, was what you said, Jack, but CPA maybe went up a little bit because of those dips in conversion rate. I think it would be tough to predict how some of those different like internal trends are going to translate in Q4. We're expecting that there's going to be quite a lot more search volume on Amazon, and more consumers searching means that you can stretch your budget more. And so CPCs, though it seems to be trending up, we've been wrong about that in the past. So I'm not really giving a good answer other than to say that the trend has been slightly up for CPCs and sponsored products and slightly down for sponsored brands. It's going to be interesting to see how things trend in Q4, but it might take a little bit longer to get a good idea.
Yeah, something else I would think about is, like, as we saw with Prime Day earlier this year, all the other retailers besides Amazon are also having their Q4 push. And you'll see consumers, as they engage in their holiday shopping behavior, begin this process of shopping around. So starting their search on Amazon and then looking at any of the other potential retailers that may carry that same product. So you might see some increases in CPCs, but less of an increase in conversions than you would expect due to that cross-shopping behavior. And then my advice on that is, like, if you have the ability to control your pricing across multiple omni-channels, you want to keep it as consistent as possible, just so that, if you're on Amazon and Walmart, you have the same price, if possible. Not always the easiest thing to accomplish, but definitely something to keep in mind. Cool. Okay. The next question was, can you discuss how the weeks on hand metric is determined in the inventory RBO? So I'm thinking in Product Center, how do we determine weeks on hand? So two ways. One, we take the trailing 4-week average and then use that as the expected run rate, then use that to determine total number of units divided by the weekly run rate gives you weeks on hand. That's the pretty easy way. For some of those vendor central clients, Amazon also gives you an estimated weeks on hand measure. So we'll pull in that as well.
The next question, do you expect a shift back to brick and mortar retail or a similar volume of e-commerce as seen as last year in Q4? That's a big question. From some of the articles that I've read, at least, I wouldn't be an expert on this matter, but the trend that we are seeing is that the trends that we've observed from more consumers shifting to e-commerce are here to stay, regardless of the state of the pandemic. Now, would we expect more consumers to shop in brick and mortar this year than last year? Probably, given what we've given the state of a pandemic at this point, but we would not expect it to be nearly as many as in years prior to the pandemic. All indications from the average consumer are that they would prefer to continue shopping on e-commerce sites for the most part. And so given that it's just an easier experience, we would expect that trend to continue.
Yeah, I think the other piece of this puzzle that we've been hearing from some of our close brand partners is reconceptualizing the distinction between brick and mortar and e-commerce as one unified commerce channel, and thinking about what they've termed as digitally influenced sales. So you saw a digital ad and then you bought it in a store, or you saw a digital ad and then you bought it via an e-commerce channel. So some brands, those are still equally valuable points of purchase. So one of the things you can do within Amazon Marketing Cloud is track your Amazon advertising efforts and their impact on in-store sales in Whole Foods or Amazon Fresh stores. So people are starting to crack that nut of how do I trace my digital efforts to my in-store buyer behavior. And I think that's something to keep in mind and keep on your radar as we enter to Q4.
Yeah, it definitely seems like different retailers are at different stages of providing that information, but they're all on the same path towards doing so. I know that Kroger does provide in-store sales units alongside their online sales units on their site. So we'll see if other retailers will start to provide similar info. Okay, and that was the end of the questions so far. Feel free to drop in any other questions. We still have plenty of time. If you're shy, you can always reach out to your customer success manager too, or to one of the resources that I have on the screen. We'll give it maybe another minute to drop in any additional questions. We also have our resident fantasy football punting expert, Jack Lindbergh, on the line too. So if you have any questions about fantasy, feel free to drop them his way.
Check out the most recent New York Times article about Seattle Seahawks punter Michael Dixon. My punting Twitter is quoted in that New York Times article. So check it out.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug for Puntalytics. Follow us at PuntRuns on Twitter.
We've got a question.
Okay, thoughts on remarketing / retargeting in supply constraint market. By supply constraint, I'm thinking this person means inventory supply constraint. I think it's challenging to remarket stuff that you don't have. It's one of the tricky pieces. I think depending on the vertical, some of those items have very strong repurchase histories. For example, all of our clients that operate in the food space, they sell groceries. Though most of those products have a very set repurchase cycle where a remarketing campaign is very cut and dry. Whereas for something like high-end electronics, the repurchase behavior is much slower. So you might actually, your remarketing campaign might be looking at, 90 days post-purchase rather than for food where you're looking at, 14 days post-purchase or post-view. So I think definitely for those categories and products that have those, very slow repurchase behavior, it's probably worth retargeting and remarketing, even if you don't have the inventory readily available, because, by the time someone does re-engage with that product, they'll be ready to buy it and you'll probably have more stock. Whereas, if you are engaging with a product that has very short repurchase cycle, I'd probably, be a little bit more conscientious about, pushing too hard on remarketing or retargeting if you're in some dire inventory strains.
Good question. Okay. Oh, one more. How much does Amazon charge versus other SSP? I'm
trying to decipher this question. Does it mean sponsored search products? How do CPCs compare on Amazon versus other platforms?
Yeah, if the person who asked that question wouldn't mind adding a little bit more,
more
take
context.
rates and yes versus other platforms.
Okay. Michael, do you want to jump in on this one? I have some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that what we've been finding, and definitely correct me if you're seeing something different in Jack, but as advertisers start to advertise across retailer, generally what we found is newer retailers start out with much lower CPCs and then they go up over time. But as retail media marketers get more savvy, there's more of a push to optimize across retailer. And so as that happens, there's going to be more of a trend towards CPCs being comparable, like within various categories as as marketers shift between categories, between retailers, depending on what's working best for them. I think that generally, like, Amazon does tend to have the highest CPCs overall of the retailers that we work with, because they are still the largest platform, and they still have there's still by far the most interest from an overall spend perspective, which is what's going to correlate with higher CPCs over time. But in some of those most competitive categories, we've definitely seen them beginning of a sort of normalization where CPCs are starting to even out between retailers. I think another thing that I've found is that there's going to be more of a willingness to bid aggressively if the retailer has stronger conversion rates. And so on retailers where we see really strong conversion rates, one that comes to mind is Instacart. We've seen that that advertisers are more willing to invest more aggressively in that channel because it's going to result in a conversion for each click. If you're in the foods category, you might have already observed that CPCs have gone up pretty quickly in Instacart over time, and that's probably one of the big reasons.
Yeah. The other thing I might add there would be something like, it also depends on the category within each individual retailer, like depending on saturation. For example, like on Instacart for non-food products. So like if you're selling at CVS or Walgreens, like a beauty care product, those CPCs are really low in comparison to people selling groceries. So on some platforms like Walmart or Instacart, if you're in the right category, you can get away with bidding close to the minimum, but most of the time on more saturated categories, the CPCs are starting to climb across the board. Okay, we got a question that is, how is Criteo retail media versus citrus ads versus Amazon in terms of ROAS?
So that's it's a good question, and citrus and Criteo are definitely big topics right now. I think that it's difficult to kind of compare apples to apples across each of these, just because Amazon has so much more scale at this point. Also, because citrus and Criteo allow you to advertise on different retailers within each of the platforms. Each of those retailers is going to have very different, a very different ROAS and very different metrics overall. So depending on if you're advertising on Target or GoPuff or what's another one on Criteo?
Best Buy.
Best Buy, yeah. We're seeing very different ROAS, and that's largely due to how many entrants there are in each of those retailers, and the categories that you're advertising in on each retailer. So I think overall, I would have to look into it to see what the actual metrics are comparing. But like I said, I'm not sure if ROAS would be really apples to apples across each of them, just based off of how different a Criteo is compared to an Amazon.
Yeah, I think if you are interested in using Criteo and Amazon and citrus all at the same time, I think PackView is the place to do that. One of the things I would draw your attention to is like our cross retail dashboard, which does try to do the best we can to sync up the attribution models to give you apples to apples to apples on however many retailers you use us for. Definitely really useful for some of my brand clients that run Amazon, Walmart, Instacart, and Criteo all at once to see how those performances stack up. Cool. Give it one more minute for questions. Oh, here we go. How do you measure attribution to sales? How do I measure it? So sales attribution has some variance, not a lot, across different retailers. Sort of the industry standard is 14-day post-click. Criteo lets you change that Instacart has some views that let you change that. Walmart had some other views that let you change that as well. But the sort of the equalizing force across all those platforms is 14-day post-click, which if you are advertising across multiple platforms, I would be sure you're reporting the data internally as 14-day post-click across the board, just so that you're comparing, apples to apples. It does get confusing at times. How does PackView measure it? We generally report on 14-day post-click. You can toggle to the other attribution models. Generally, I would advise people not to unless they have a very specific reason, just because it gets confusing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll let you see whatever you would like to. Well, not whatever, but we'll provide different attribution windows that are provided back to us by retailer. But the industry standard that was set by Amazon is definitely 14-day post-click. Okay. Lots of really good questions today. Thank you guys for your engagement. Like I mentioned, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to your customer success point of contact or to either of the contacts on the page. Otherwise, you will receive a recording of this webinar after attending. So feel free to rewatch it if we went through anything too fast. And there's also going to be that CPC report that's available for download. So if you have any more specific questions or would like to dive in a little bit more deeper, then definitely take a look at that. Thank you everyone for joining today.
Yeah, thank you so much.